services. Prior to this position, I was a transit manager for 6 years. So this is definitely near and dear to my heart. So I am thrilled that you guys are all here. I'd like to start by acknowledging with respect that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and is known as Bawatin. It is home to Garden River First Nations, Chewana First Nations, and the historic Sault Ste. Marine Council. Today we're here to discuss the future of our city's transit network. Last December, with the expertise of WSP Consulting, the city launched a transit optimization study. This study will assess our transit services, efficiencies, and explore improvement opportunities. Through the process, we aim to evaluate the current transit network, including fixed routes and on-demand services, examine ways to improve efficiency and connectivity, assess the potential relocation of the Dennis Street Terminal and its impacts, as well as provide recommendations to enhance services while maintaining safe and reliable transportation for our community. I am pleased to introduce Jeremy Finkelman, the lead transportation planner with WSP. He'll walk us through the study and its objectives. Jeremy will outline the key aspects of the study, and afterwards we'll have time for questions and an opportunity to review the display boards at the back of the room. WSP, along with transit staff, will be available to answer any questions you may have. And the transit staff are very easily identifiable in the room, and I think most of you would recognize them as well. Before we begin, I encourage you to share your feedback by completing the survey, which is also available online. If you'd like to do it through your mobile device, there's QR codes on all of the panels that you can scan and bring it up on your phone to submit. Your input is incredibly invaluable to us, and as we work towards looking for a more efficient and responsive transit system. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it is wonderful to see the amount of interest there is in Sault Transit. Really, it's contributions from the community that help us at the end of the day build a better transit network. At the end of the day, who are the real experts? It's not us from Toronto. It's you guys. It's the users of the system. And we need to be sure, as we are moving forward, that the transit system works for the operators and for the users, and that it's getting you to where you want to be as quickly as possible in a cost-efficient manner. Next slide, please. Just a brief agenda for today. We were planning on originally having this presentation at 5:30, and we will still do the exact same presentation at 5:30. But due to the demand in the room, we decided to bring it up an hour so that everyone here has the benefit of being walked through the panels. What you're going to see me explain here today provides a little bit more context than what is on the panels, but essentially it's the same information. So if you miss aspects of the presentation or parts of the presentation, rest assured the information is provided on the panels behind you. We'll be providing some context today on the transit system from a technical perspective, but really the main point of today's meeting is to hear from you about challenges, opportunities, issues facing you as you navigate through the transit system here. And again, if we can get a better understanding of what those are, both from a technical, which we've done, as well as most importantly from a user perspective, we will be able to hopefully come out with solutions that will address a range of the issues and challenges that you may be dealing with today. I will mention to that effect that there's a significant number of panels at the back that ask specific questions around those issues and opportunities that you're facing in relation to the system. There's also a survey which is live until April the 11th, so I think a couple of weeks or so, available online and in print form here today. Please take the time to fill that out. Our team at WSP will be reviewing every submission, will be reading every answer. So please take the time to fill out the survey. Your opinions are very valuable. Next slide, please. Today is ultimately it's a drop-in information session. As I've already noted, there are a series of panels behind you. The purpose of today's session is essentially to introduce folks here to the Sault Transit Optimization Study, to provide an update on work completed to date, and as previously mentioned, to gather input from you. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what is the Transit Optimization Study? Well, the study provides an opportunity to take a look at the way the transit system functions today. We will be assessing the effectiveness of the current bus routes and on-demand services. We also want to hear about how the current routes have evolved, and understanding whether that system in its evolved form works better or worse than prior iterations that we that have been here in Sault Ste. Marie. Critically, we'll also be evaluating the potential relocation of the Dennis Street Transit Terminal and its impacts. This is a ongoing stream of work that the city has been involved in for several years now. There is a desire from an operational standpoint to take a look at the impacts of that relocation through this study. Ultimately, we will be providing recommendations to enhance the efficiency of the network while maintaining safe and reliable service. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of the study objectives, I won't bother to read out everything here on this slide because I think I've largely talked about them in the previous slide. But essentially, reviewing the current service, examining opportunities where there's a lack of efficiency or where there are issues and challenges, evaluating the relocation of the terminal, providing recommendations for improvements, including an evaluation of different alternatives, which we'll be doing in future phases of the study, and finally considering innovative service delivery models. We could go to the next slide, please. In terms of the study timeline, we're about 1/3 of the way through the study, and we are gathered here today to discuss the challenges, the issues, and the opportunities ahead of us. Critical to that, of course, is hearing from you. Once we hear from you and we understand from a user perspective as well as from a technical perspective, we're going to go to the drawing board. And that's what I say, that's when the fun stuff begins for our team. We will be taking a look at a range of different thematic options to improve the service, and we'll be drilling down to essentially a short list of 3 potential improvement options. We'll then come back to you at that stage with those potential options. And again, we'll want to hear from you. What did we miss? What makes sense with these potential options? What doesn't make sense? What should we refine further? So that's our next touch point, and that next touch point will be in June, and hopefully I'll be able to experience your beautiful city with nicer weather. Finally, coming out of all of this, we will be drafting a 5-year transit optimization plan and a 10-year high-level transit management plan. Essentially, what that means is we'll be deciding out how the network should change or how elements should change over the next 5 and 10 years, how much those changes are going to cost, when new buses need to be purchased if a system expansion is happening, and to sort of schedule that in over a 10-year period. Next slide, please. So just some background information here in terms of how Sault Ste. Marie moves. This slide is from the most recent census, Census 2021. And it summarizes essentially, and this is probably well known for most here in the room, that the vast majority of people here in Sault Ste. Marie drive their cars and either travel as the driver or travel as a passenger. Indeed, over 90% of trips to work, according to the last census, are made in a vehicle. Transit occupies 3%. That might seem low, but in reality, this growth, this share that is transit has been growing recently. And over the coming years, if trends continue, will continue to grow. Next slide, please. Sault Transit already provides a variety of services. Again, this is background information, I think, for most of you who use the system. At the centerpiece of it all is the conventional fixed route system, which serves a good 90% of the total trips on Sault Transit. There's additionally community bus, there's on-demand service, there's seasonal services to the beach, and there's Parabus services as well. And all of these service offerings are absolutely critical to the delivery of needed access for people of all abilities. Next slide, please. Just some numbers here in terms of overall ridership over the past 6 years or so. You can see a significant drop as a result of the COVID era. And this is not unusual to Sault Ste. Marie. This indeed is very common. It was very common across the transit industry as a result of COVID and the related restrictions. What isn't as common, however, is to see the rebound that we've seen here in your system as an aftershock of COVID. What we've seen here is that your system has entirely and then some regained its pre-COVID ridership. So this is a very good news story for your system altogether. Your system now serves over 1.9 million trips per year. Now that might sound like gobbledygook because who thinks about trips per year? We do in the transit industry. But in terms of what this means on a day-to-day basis, on a typical weekday, you have about 8,500 trips occurring on the transit system. As I mentioned, the ridership has fully recovered post-pandemic and is now at record levels. Ridership is heaviest during the midweek, peaking at about 8,500 passenger trips per day, as I mentioned. And when that sort of gets worked out versus the amount of service that's being invested into the system, this means that for every hour of operation, every hour that the bus is operating, about 23 passenger trips are being accommodated on your system. Which is, when you take a look at other systems, similar systems of Sault's size, is a pretty favorable metric altogether. Next slide, please. Who's on board? I had the pleasure of riding the system yesterday, and certainly saw a broad cross section of society on the conventional system. I think one of the more defining groups, however, that I did see are post-secondary students. There were a lot of post-secondary students on the bus, and indeed, when we take a look at our fare breakdown, a lot of that fare comes from the U passes, the unlimited student ride passes issued by Algoma University. There's a lot of people coming from Sault College as well. There's also adults, people who pay with cash fares, seniors are on board, youth and children, so a broad cross section. Next slide, please. So how's the system being used today? I know these are very small numbers, and it's very hard to see it here. Again, all this information is provided on the panels in the back. So if you're having trouble seeing, it's there in the back. But just to sort of broadly describe how the system is being used, no surprise for system users, our busiest stop in the system, of course, is the terminal. The terminal sees over 2,000 boards every single day getting on at that terminal. And when you think that there's about 8,500 trips per day that are being taken, almost 2,100 is starting at that terminal. That is a very important part of your network. I've noted the top 10 stops. And what's interesting, and this is a little bit different from some other transit systems that we evaluate, is that there's, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 very heavy use stops. The next one is Algoma University, around 550 people get on there every day. The Northern Transfer Hub, about 500 people get on there. 500 to 700 get on. The Food Basics at Pine Street, about 100. But once you get past stop number 7 or so in the top 10, it drops below 100. So this is showing us that your ridership is fairly dispersed. And when we sort of later break that down route by route, it's interesting to see when we break that down route by route that routes 4 and 5 have the highest number of riders, number of users, followed in close succession by Route 2. Now, when we break that down, however, to the amount of people that are on board, Route 4 comes out way ahead. Route 4 is your busiest route in the network, and I had the pleasure of riding it yesterday to just see the degree of turnover and number of people that are getting on that route. On the other side of things, the community circulator it has very low relative ridership. I think about 2.5 or 3 per service hour invested in that. So there's perhaps some rethinking that needs to be done around how these routes are prioritized. And this data is very interesting for us as we sort of move forward to next steps. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of gaps and opportunities, as you know, your network is coverage oriented, which is quite typical of smaller communities. The system connects all key locations in the Sault, but those connections may be indirect. The routes are designed, of course, to intersect at the time transfer at Dennis Street, which allows for the maximum connectivity between the routes. This type of system layout has its advantages in that most of the urban area of Sault Ste. Marie is well covered, but it also has its disadvantages in that it may be relatively indirect to get from one location to another, with people perhaps finding that taking the bus between 2 locations can take as long as 3, 4, or 5 times what it would take to drive. So this is, these are sort of the trade-offs that you get with a coverage-based or a coverage-oriented style system. Next slide, please. In terms of other gaps, it's critical as I've sort of driven around the community and explored that there are a variety of a large number of stops that are simply not connected to the sidewalk network. Driving around yesterday, I saw a lot of people waiting for the bus in a snow pile. I saw a lot of people sort of struggling walking along the side of a busy road to get to a bus stop. This is a problem because when we talk about transit, there's 4 components ultimately to a transit trip. The first component is how do you get from your origin to your first bus stop? That's your walking. Typically, it's walking, right? Getting from your origin to your bus stop. Your second step is, what's your waiting experience like at the bus stop? Is there a shelter? Is it comfortable? Is it warm? Your third of the 4 steps is your actual ride on the bus. And your fourth is how do you get from your destination bus stop to your final destination? If those 4 elements are not thought about systematically, there's going to be issues with your transit trip. And indeed, what we're seeing is that a full 29% of your bus stops are not connected to the sidewalk network, again, which creates issues for everybody, but especially so for people with physical disabilities. And this is a very, very serious issue. We could go to the next slide, please. In terms of on-demand services, I've been speaking to a lot of people, and we've started to hear about on-demand services and how they're going. You know, as you know, the on-demand services were introduced during the COVID era in periods of much lower ridership, and they served their purpose when they were introduced originally on Sunday. Since being introduced in the COVID era on Sunday, your system ridership, as we've shown, has grown significantly, and the on-demand services have been transitioned to Saturday evening as well as Sunday evening. It's understood, or it's been made aware to me, that there are some issues with this. There are some issues around reliability, people getting home from work critically after 7 o'clock on a Saturday or a Sunday, you know, bus not being able to get folks to where they need to get to in a reasonable time. So we're very interested in hearing more about your experience with on-demand services. Perhaps some have positive experiences. I've heard a lot of negative so far, but perhaps there's some that have positive. Next slide, please. Another vital service offering, of course, is Parabus. Sault Transit's Parabus service provides curb-to-curb public transit service for persons with physical disabilities and vision loss. Some of the things we've already heard is that bookings can be made up to 2 weeks in advance and are made on a first-come, first-served basis, but that if those bookings aren't made sooner rather than later, those spots can fill up. These are opinions that have already been expressed. Those are critical issues in sort of understanding how Parabus can be better improved to better serve the people who need to use that system, and very, very valuable component of the overall transit system. So we've asked some questions on the back around how can Parabus be improved? Are you able to secure a ride when you need one? And also separately, what types of improvements to the conventional system could be made? Perhaps there are access to bus stop issues or others that would help make the conventional system a realistic alternative so that you know, you have more travel options. Next slide, please. In terms of the downtown terminal relocation, as I mentioned previously, the downtown terminal relocation is it will be looked at as part of this study. The city is quite specifically exploring relocating the existing downtown terminal to the transit center located at 111 Huron Street, which is about 5 blocks to the west. As has been reported in the past, that the current terminal continues to experience challenges, security and otherwise. And there are some opportunities to reduce both capital and operating costs as a result of a potential relocation. So we're going to be exploring this from an impact on routes perspective, we at WSP, but we're critically interested in hearing from you, the users. How would relocating the terminal impact the way you use the system? We need to hear that information, because it's all good to see something on paper, but if if things are work a certain way for users, we need to know about that. If we can go to the next slide, please. Finally, coming out of, and we are sort of wrapping up now, coming out of this session, we're going to aim to develop a vision and guiding principles for the transit network. That vision and guiding principles will be sort of the key foundation for how we move forward, how we develop options and assess those options. So we do have a panel at the back where we're asking you to please provide some inputs around what you feel a vision for transit could potentially be. That's sort of me summarizing this slide. If we could go to the next slide now, please. And ultimately, we want to know what types of themes of improvements you feel are most necessary as we start to develop options. There's different themes here. Don't feel restricted to the themes we have here. There may be others that we didn't contemplate, but in terms of the improvement themes that are here, we're talking about improving access to bus stops, improving bus shelters and infrastructure, increasing system coverage, improving frequency and reliability for certain routes, improving route directness between core locations, the terminal relocation, expanding periods of operation, improvements to paratransit, and perhaps a rethink of on-demand, issues related to fare structure and affordability of the system, and issues in relation to sustainability. So these are sort of broad themes. We'd like to hear where you feel the focus should be. Obviously, in an ideal world where we're not constrained by money, we could make all of these improvements. But the reality of the situation is that budgets are as they are. The city has to obviously allocate budgets to a variety of different programs, and transit is just but one component. So it's important to get a sense of what those priorities are, so that the system can be developed in line with those. So we can go to the next slide, please. So to wrap up, our next steps involve reviewing feedback that we received today. And again, thank you very much for providing your feedback in advance. We will review the public survey input. Then we'll move forward with option development and evaluation. We'll also be exploring, from a technical standpoint, the relocation of the downtown bus terminal. And finally, we will develop the 5- and 10-year plan. Next slide, please. If you'd like to stay informed, please go to the website. And if you can make it out in June, we look forward to seeing you all again then in June, where we can have a good conversation about some of the options that have been developed. And you can all yell at me for developing the wrong options. All right, thank you very much. And again, thank you again for your feedback.
Thanks, everybody. Jeremy, that was amazing. I appreciate it. So, as you mentioned, we'll be able to board along the back of the room. We're here for your feedback. Please, anything that you need to say that you want to say, you can either ask us or throw the staff around. Jeremy's available, I'm available, and also, most importantly, the surveys. There's another sheet with notes to take. There's a comment sheet. Please fill that out, give it in, and ask any questions about the board, and as much feedback as you can possibly give, we can absolutely appreciate it. So thank you so much for coming, and take a look around.
Thanks. Yeah.